Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Transition to IATF 16949. Today, we're going to be covering two topics. One is understanding and avoiding the most common nonconformities that we've encountered so far on transition audits. And second is auditing to add value. So we're going to see that one of the most common nonconformities is internal auditor competency. So we're going to talk about auditing to add value and tie those two pieces together nicely. My name is Shannon Craddock. I'm the Programs and Accreditations Manager here at Perry Johnson Registrars. Additionally, I am an IATF 16949 lead auditor, so I've encountered many of these scenarios firsthand and unfortunately have written them up at some clients. All participants are muted to ensure sound quality. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into the question or comment feature, and I will be sure to address them at the end of the webinar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, and if you would like to access a copy of the recording as well as copies of the slides, they'll be available about 24 hours after today's presentation on our website, www.pjr.com. Okay, so today we're going to start with the status of the transition, where things stand as we approach that 9/14/2018 ISO TS 16949 obsolescence date. We'll also talk about the most common major and minor nonconformities that have been documented so far on the transition audits. I'm a firm believer that understanding is key to preventing these nonconformities, so I will attempt to provide some guidance on each of the clauses where we're seeing these nonconformities. And then we'll talk about auditing to add value, knowing that one of the most common nonconformities is internal auditor competency. Okay, the latest slide I have on the distribution of both IATF 16949 certificates and ISO TS 16949 certificates shows that there's just under 69,000 certificates in the world. Obviously, most of those are in China, almost 31,000. There's also a lot in Korea and North America as a whole, although India has more than the United States, and in Europe, Germany is leading that with 3,280. So a couple comments about the IATF's transition strategy, which, by the way, can be downloaded from their website, www.IATFglobaloversight.org. You can also set an alert and ensure that you're kept up to date on any revisions to that transition strategy. The process applies to both manufacturing sites and any associated remote supporting functions. It's important that you read through the strategy and understand how the requirements affect or apply to your organization. And as I just stated, make sure that you sign up to receive alerts so you're kept up to date on any updates to the strategy. And any questions, first direct them to your certification body. Hopefully your certification body is PJR, but we'll gladly field any questions, even if you're working with another CB. But before you go to one of the oversight offices or your customers, start with the certification body. Here is a screenshot of IATFglobaloversight.org. And you can see here is where you can download a copy of the IATF transition strategy. So before your transition audit, you're going to want to make sure that you've conducted a full system internal audit to IATF 16949, including ISO 9001:2015, and a management review after this internal audit. And this is all before your certification body comes in there. This is because you're required to show that the QMS is in compliance to all IATF 16949 and ISO 9001:2015 requirements. Now, if you were previously TS certified, you can supplement your TS 16949 internal audit with the deltas that are present in IATF 16949. So you can do a supplemental internal audit to cover those additional requirements. Or you can do a brand new internal audit start to finish, entirely your choice. Similarly, for management review, this could be accomplished through a combination of a prior management review to ISO TS 16949, and then a supplemental management review to hit the additional requirements of IATF 16949. Failure to do these activities, however, will result in a decision of you not being ready and will lead to suspension of your certificate if you are already certified. So just like any other audit, the transition audit includes the audit itself, nonconformity management. So within 60 days, getting your certification body copies of corrective action responses. Certification body lead auditor then gets an additional 30 days to review and accept those responses. The audit package then goes for decision by the CB's veto power and issuance of the certificate. The transition audit, because it's equivalent in duration to a recertification audit, starts a new 3-year audit cycle. And again, it's going to cover all the requirements of both IATF 16949 and ISO 9001:2015. Some good news, however, the IATF has approved a deviation to allow certification bodies to make a positive certification decision after the 9/14/2018 obsolescence date of TS 16949, as long as the decision is made within 120 days from the last day of the transition audit. Keep in mind, however, this could result in a period where the client's TS certification no longer exists and no IATF certificate has been issued. This may or may not be okay in your customer's eyes, but this flexibility does exist, especially if you're one of those organizations that is not transitioning until the late June, July, August timeframe, essentially now. As long as that audit is done before 9/14/2018, that recertification transition audit, you won't have to start over with the stage 1 and stage 2. However, there will be a gap in your certification. So let's get into the top major and minor nonconformities that have been written so far during the transition. And these data were gathered through a data mining project in the IATF database, and they represent performance of organizations worldwide. So where we're seeing the most major nonconformities, first 10.2.1, nonconformity and corrective action. There's a lot of nonconformities here, 87. And the reason for that is if you can ever not close a finding from the prior audit, the classification of that finding that can't be closed is automatically elevated to a major. And because the corrective action was ineffective, a second major is written against the corrective action process. But what's interesting is that the second most common major is on internal auditor competency, hence the rationale for the second part of today's presentation. We're seeing a lot of issues with the competency of internal auditors. Problem solving, contingency plans. Contingency plans is a heavily beefed up section. 851, control of production and service provision. Similar to contingency plans, TPM, total productive maintenance, is beefed up. Control plan, customer specific requirements, the internal audit, and measurement systems analysis. Top minor nonconformities, you're going to see some repeats here. Contingency plans, total productive maintenance, control plan. Manufacturing process design output is a new one. Control of service and production provision, we saw that as a major. Work operator instructions, special characteristics, problem solving, etc. So why are we seeing these nonconformities? As I just stated, there's some overlap. In some cases, against some requirements, we're seeing both minor and major NCs. Total productive maintenance, problem solving, contingency plans, control of production and service provision, control plan, and MSA. What's interesting, however, is that these common minor and major NCs are not necessarily new quality management system requirements. They often represent expansions of existing requirements. So to address this, the IATF has issued sanction interpretations and frequently asked questions to further expand or clarify these requirements. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the common nonconformities where findings are being written. The first is 10.2.1, nonconformity and corrective action. Interestingly, this is a fundamental 9001-2015 requirement. And as I stated before, it most likely results from repeat third-party audit findings. So we're forced to write a major in this area. However, it could also result from poor problem solving in response to customer issues or internal issues in an organization. Issues may also arise from organizations not taking action at all in response to a non-conforming situation, or organizations simply doing a poor job when they do take corrective action. Remember, containment and correction should address the symptoms of the problem, and you need to include an extent analysis. So if the lead auditor has indicated that he found an uncontrolled form or a piece of measuring equipment that's out of calibration, you have to do a complete sweep of your building, 100%, and ensure that everything has been looked at and confirmed to be in a state of calibration or a state of document control. Your root cause should answer the question, what in the system failed such that the problem occurred? And the corrective action should address the root cause and not simply be a repeat of the correction. I do a webinar on root cause analysis and systemic corrective action that goes into a lot more depth on these last 3 bullet points. Okay, internal auditor competency. This is a big one. A documented process for how you determine the competency of your internal auditors is required. This could be a procedure, a work instruction, a flow chart, but there has to be some type of document outlining your process. You also have to maintain a list of internal auditors. Keep in mind there are different requirements for the auditors depending on the type of audit that they're conducting. Management system auditors need to understand the automotive process approach to auditing, customer specific requirements, ISO 9001 and IATF 16949, the applicable core tools, namely SPC, FEMA, and MSA, and basic audit skills, how to plan, to execute, and close out an audit. Manufacturing process auditors, on the other hand, need to understand, obviously, the process that they're auditing and associated documents, most commonly the control plan and FMEA. And product auditors need to understand the product requirements for the product that's being audited and any associated measurement equipment. If an organization uses its own personnel to provide training to meet these requirements, then the organization is required to maintain documented information regarding the trainer's competency. And this is covered in Sanction Interpretation 4, which again can be downloaded from IATFglobaloversight.org. So a lot of times people will say, well, we used our quality manager or management rep who's been in the industry for a number of years to train all of our other internal auditors. That may be great. And it may be that the training curriculum included everything it was supposed to. ISO 9001-2015, IATF 16949, customer specific requirements, core tools, etc. However, if you can't prove the competency of that trainer, there will be an issue. It's not simply enough to provide a resume or a bio and say they've been in the industry for years. You have to set competency requirements in your documented process and prove that they meet them. (10.2.3) problem solving. A documented process for problem solving is required, and this should ensure conformance with any customer specific requirements. So if the customer flows down a specific technique, 8D for example, your documented process should reflect that. Again, watch for common pitfalls in problem solving. Your correction, not including an extent analysis, i.e. the auditor told you that he found a gauge that was not calibrated. You need to also tell us that you've gone through every other gauge in your building. That's right, every other gauge in your building. And how many of those are no longer in a state of calibration. Root cause cannot be a restatement of the finding. It needs true root cause. And the corrective action needs to address the root cause, not simply restate the correction. Also keep in mind that if your corrective action includes a process change, it's highly likely that your control plan and FEMA also need to get updated. These should be living documents. Contingency plans in 6.1.2.3, not a new requirement, but a significantly enhanced one. Here are the most important additions. Letter C, preparing contingency plans for continuity of supply in the event of a number of situations. The new one here is cyber attacks on information technology systems. We'll all remember earlier this calendar year, the ransomware scenario. I have friends and colleagues whose companies were personally affected. So your contingency plan needs to address this. Thus, your IT team, whether it's internal or outsourced, needs to be part of your contingency planning team. In E, periodically testing the contingency plans for effectiveness. This means simulations or drills is appropriate. So, for example, one thing you could simulate is a interruption in your labor supply due to a strike, especially if you're in a union culture. If you call those temporary staffing agencies listed on your contingency plan, can they really send you 40 to 60 operators as quickly as they told you they could send them? What's the process for getting them trained? If your IT systems go down, is your backup readily available? Is your generator available? So testing the contingency plans through simulations or drills. And then reviewing the plans at minimum annually, using a multidisciplinary team, including top management, and updating as required. A great time to review your contingency plan is after one of these simulations. More information on this is available in Sanctioned Interpretation number 3. 851, Control of Production and Service Provision. This is a 9001-2015 requirement. The new requirements here are the appointment of competent persons, including any required qualifications, and the implementation of actions to prevent human error. So as you're setting up your system, this is the old 751. What type of error proofing are you adding? Equipment with sensors, red rabbits, pokey oak, etc. 8515, total productive maintenance. This is a significantly enhanced requirement. Previously, the requirement focused on preventive maintenance. The emphasis is now on total productive maintenance as a way of improving the integrity of production through equipment, processes, and employees that add value. So the new requirements show up in letter C, providing resources for machine, equipment, and facility maintenance. So one of the most common things I see auditing an organization is that they're behind on their preventive maintenance. There's an explicit requirement from top management to ensure that there's sufficient maintenance personnel that get this work done. Documented maintenance objectives. A lot of organizations have maintenance objectives. This particular section of the standard, letter F, lists some examples. These need to form an input to management review. Similar and following logically from letter F is letter G, regular review of the maintenance plan and objectives. And where you aren't meeting a target, you aren't meeting OEE, or you're not completing your planned maintenance hours, or there's too much downtime, what's your plan to address where your objectives are not being achieved? And then J is periodic overhaul of equipment. (8511). Here we're going to see just a few new requirements relative to control plans. Again, the most common nonconformity I see is the lack of agreement between the control plan and execution of physical processes on the floor. Folks, this should be no surprise to you. Every single TS 16949 audit, every single IATF 16949 audit, your lead auditor asks you for a copy of the control plan for a job that's running on the floor. They walk that control plan. They look to make sure that you're performing the process exactly as written. If you're not doing this in your layered process audits or your manufacturing process audits, that's a huge problem. You should be walking the control plan. I can't tell you how many times I see lapses between what's written in the control plan and what's executed on the floor. Additionally, there are some new requirements. Requirement that verification of job setups is included on the control plan. First off, last off part validation. Also, that control plans need to be reviewed at a set frequency based on risk analysis, not only when any change occurs. So certainly you should be updating your control plan as a result of a change in the process, maybe due to a corrective action. But also for some of your high-risk products, are you periodically doing a review of your control plans? Now a requirement. (432) takes us back to the beginning of the standard. And it's always been understood that there's a need to fulfill and satisfy customer-specific requirements. IATF has a very explicit requirement in that the organization is required to evaluate the organization's customer-specific requirements and include them in the organization's QMS. This means, so this is the kind of the take-home point here, that the supplier needs some sort of process to evaluate their customer-specific requirements. How do they get their arms around the requirements? Who subscribes to the website? Who checks for updates? Okay, once you have your arms around what all the requirements are, does the team review them and decide if you're meeting them or not and have to implement something? And then where in your QMS are you meeting this? So some sort of matrix, and that's what we most typically see. There may be other ways to address this, I want to be clear. But typically the output of this process is some sort of matrix that tells us what the customer-specific requirements are, clause by clause that apply, and where in your management system you're addressing these. 922, internal audit. While this is a common nonconformity, not much new in terms of requirements when we compare the IATF 16949 to ISO TS 16949. MSA 71511. Studies need to be conducted on each type of equipment identified in the control plan. FAQ number 6, again available for download at www.iatfglobaloversight.org. Are studies required on each instrument or individual device? And the answer is no. A complete statistical study on each piece of equipment is not required. Instruments with the same characteristics, measurement range, repeatability, resolution, etc., can be grouped together as a family and then a sample instrument studied. Obviously, adhere to customer-specific requirements, the reference manuals. The most common ones flow down are the AIAG's tools, so make sure you're following the prescriptive nature of those studies. And if you use any alternative methods or accept results that are slightly out of the acceptable range, you want to maintain records of customer acceptance of both those methods and results. 8352, manufacturing process design output. Here are the changes that the list of manufacturing process design outputs has been expanded. So what we need to see coming out of the manufacturing process design process is the special characteristics, identification of process input variables that impact characteristics, tooling and equipment, including capability studies, a capacity analysis, and then maintenance plans and instructions. Worker or operator instructions. This isn't a new requirement, but it has been strengthened when we look at IATF 16949. There's an explicit requirement to address language needs, which means if operators in your facility speak 4 languages, we need to see operator instructions in those 4 languages. English or whatever the native language of your area is not enough. If they speak Vietnamese, Polish, Spanish, and English in your plant, and those are the only languages they speak, we need operator instructions in all 4 languages. These instructions obviously have to be clearly understood by the personnel doing the work and need to include applicable quality, safety, and other aspects to ensure consistent performance of each operation. (8.3.3.3) Special characteristics. Again, you can consult Sanction Interpretation 6 for more information. The first bullet point talks about the process. So you need to have a multidisciplinary process to establish, document, and implement your process for identifying special characteristics, including special characteristics identified by your customer and your own risk analysis. Once you have that process down pat, what is your team going to do? How do they review what's given by the customer? How do you look at things gone right, things gone wrong, lessons, other lessons learned, and determine what the special characteristics are? So once you've done that, you need to document all the special characteristics in the product or manufacturing documents, drawings, your risk analysis, your control plans, your operator instructions. These special characteristics need to be cascaded through each of these documents using the appropriate symbols and the controls required. So the second bullet point here, what's your process for getting your arms around the special characteristics? And the third, once you have all those special characteristics, make sure they're flowed down throughout all your documents. 8513, verification of job setups. The organization shall verify job changes that require a new setup. Organizations have to maintain documented information for setup personnel, perform first off, last off part comparisons, maintain samples for retention and comparison, and retain records of process and product approval following any validation actions. Okay, now that we have addressed these common major and minor nonconformities, ideally, you want to prevent these in your third-party audit conducted by your certification body audit. One of the best ways to do that is to catch them in your internal audit. So let's talk about how you should be conducting your internal audits based on the type of organization that you are. Before I talk about the 4 classifications of organizations, let's talk about some, bear with me. Okay, so before we talk about the 4 classifications of organizations, let's talk about industry's goal. Their goal in the automotive industry, not different from other types of industries such as aerospace, is to drive on-time, on-quality performance throughout its supply base. Internal audits are, I think, the single most critical tool to help achieving this level of performance. So the audit process should change as the organization's management system and quality culture become more sophisticated. So let's talk about the different types of organization. So here on the x-axis, we're seeing the maturity of quality culture in the organization. Zone 1 means a relatively low maturity of quality culture. Zone 2 is a high level. And then up the y-axis, the maturity of the QMS. Zone 1 is relatively non-conforming, and Zone 3 is a conforming QMS. Ultimately, we want to get to Zone 4, which is a high level of quality culture and a highly conforming quality management system. We're going to start with Zone 1 and how to audit if you're an organization in Zone 1, meaning a low maturity of the management system culture, and basically an immature management system that's having some trouble conforming to base requirements. So in Zone 1, what can an auditor do? Ensure that whenever nonconformities are encountered, the auditee has a clear understanding of what the standard requires and why the nonconformity is being raised. Here, it's really important that your internal auditors are highly competent in writing a very clear finding that includes the 3 basic parts: the statement of nonconformity, so the process that's broken, separate from the objective evidence that enhances the understanding of the finding or lists the symptoms of the problem, and a very clear citation of the requirement not being met. Because problem solving won't be effective if the auditee doesn't understand what's broken or what needs to be fixed. Second, you need to try to convince the auditee or the customers of that process that resolving these nonconformities will lead to improved performance. And if they really think that correcting the nonconformity the right way is going to lead to this improved performance, they're more likely to believe and commit to the process. Regardless, however, all identified nonconformities need to be documented as such. And that's how you'll get this higher performing QMS. It's not simply enough to say, just implement a quick fix. I'm not going to write that up. I'm not going to formally document that. When that happens, there's no disciplined problem solving. The root cause is never understood, and we just have band-aids to problems. Okay, Zone 2. Organizations don't often fall into Zone 2, at least in my experience. These organizations are those that have a high level of quality culture, but a relatively immature quality management system. So the challenge here is your auditors really need to be able to think outside the box and understand the way in which the organization's existing practices meet the requirements of the ISO standard. So those auditors that tend to be really checklist auditors and need to use some type of guidance document or working document as a tool may struggle if your organization falls into Zone 2. Organizations in Zone 2 tend to have some well-implemented quality practices, maybe some lean manufacturing, they may be Six Sigma, etc. You don't want to insist that the organization redefines its processes and documentation to align to the clause structure of the standard. Auditors should be able to, at minimum, be aware of the organization's methodologies and some of these great tools, these great quality tools that they've implemented, and be able to see to what extent they're effective in meeting the requirements of the standard. Auditors also need to be the type that aren't easily intimidated by the organization's apparent high degree of sophistication. If you have an auditee that throws around terms like Six Sigma or 5S or Kanban, don't be intimidated. Is the organization meeting the requirements? The organization may be using these great tools as part of the overall management philosophy, but there still may be gaps in the way the tools are implemented. The auditor needs to be able to identify any systematic problems and raise appropriate nonconformities. Auditors need to be careful and be able to defend their findings, as they may be accused of being pedantic or even bureaucratic. The auditee may say, well, so what, I'm not meeting this. So what, I've missed preventive maintenance on a couple pieces of machines. Look at this great oil analysis program I've implemented as part of predictive maintenance. That's fantastic. You're still required to perform preventive maintenance. Zone 3. I see a lot of organizations that fit into Zone 3 in my audit experience. Here we've got organizations that have a relatively mature conforming management system, but a somewhat immature quality culture in the organization. These organizations tend to be those that are certified to one management system standard for a significant period of time and are thus able to demonstrate a high level of conformity to the management system, yet at the same time not truly have implemented a management system culture throughout the organization. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes these tend to be the organizations that have to prepare for their audit or cram for the exam. In these scenarios, the management system might have been implemented under pressure from customers and built around the requirements of the standard rather than the organization's own implemented processes that already exist or their own needs and expectations. And the problem here is that the management system may operate in parallel with the way the organization routinely carries out its operations, generating redundancy and inefficiency, and often leading to the organization having to prepare for the audit because they typically do things one way and then they realize, hey, we should have been following our system all along. Make what you have that's currently conforming work for you. Here, your auditors need to be able to act as a catalyst for the organization to build on its standard-based management system and integrate it in its day-to-day operations. Encourage and stimulate the organization to go beyond the requirements of the standard, again with that goal of on-time, on-quality performance that those automotive OEMs so desire. So here, the questions the auditor asks and the way he or she asks those questions can provide valuable insights or trigger the organization into thinking and getting the wheels turning as to how the management system can become more efficient and useful. Insightful opportunities for improvement could include ways in which the effectiveness of the management system might be enhanced and address improved efficiency. Okay, Zone 4, where we're all ultimately striving to be a relatively conforming management system, high level of QMS conformance, and a high sophistication of the organization's quality culture. So for these organizations, the expectation of how an audit might add value will be very challenging for the auditor. So you want your most sophisticated auditors that are auditing companies in Zone 4. And the reason for this is there's a perception amongst the customers of the internal audit process, i.e. the process owners, that the routine internal audits are superfluous and do not add a lot of value in the organization's eyes. So if you've got a standard checklist, check the box type of auditor who doesn't ask insightful, thought-provoking questions that really drive performance, you're not going to get a lot of value out of your internal audits if you're a company in Zone 4. One of the most important customers in a Zone 4 internal audit is top management. It's important for the auditor to have a clear understanding of the organization's strategic objectives and short-term and long-term business goals. And not only understand these, but have the ability to put the management system audit within that context. So interviewing a top executive, you want to increase sales by 4% from last year's sales performance? How are you going to get there? What are you going to do about the customer complaints from Ford that may be preventing new business? Those are the types of questions that need to be asked. The auditor needs to dedicate sufficient time on their audit plan for these detailed discussions with top management. Understand top management's expectations for the management system and incorporate these as audit criteria. Okay, so regardless of what zone your company falls in, let's talk about how internal audits are most effective in the planning, execution, and analysis stages. So in the planning stage, you want to understand your organization's expectations and quality culture, i.e. what zone are we in? Understand if there's any specific concerns to be addressed, including output from previous audits. Make sure you're doing an evaluation of statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements. As a quality manager or owner of the internal audit process, make sure you've got the most strategic audit team selected. And if you've got a Zone 4 company, make sure you're not using Zone 1 type internal auditors. And always provide your audit team with sufficient time. Audit technique, obviously focus more on the processes and performance against key indicators as opposed to procedures. Let's face it, by internal audit 37, we all know what procedures in place. Yes, there are some explicit requirements for documented procedures, work instructions, and they're necessary for the organization to plan and control its work. But the driving force should be process performance. Again, on time, on quality performance in the eyes of your customer. Again, focus more on results and less on records. In some fashion, in a similar fashion to the last slide, some records are necessary to prove the effective functioning of the system. But in order to add value, the internal audit team should be aware of and give credit for other forms of evidence. In terms of audit techniques, remember the 7 quality management principles for QMS assessments. And use the PDCA approach to evaluate the organization's process effectiveness. So when you're auditing a given process, you're obviously starting with the process owner. What's involved in planning the process? What documents, tools, instructions, competencies are required? Then go out and make sure the process is being executed in accordance with these documented instructions. Ask the owner, are you achieving desired results? And where you're not, what actions are you taking to get to a point where you are achieving desired results? In terms of audit technique, make sure you're adopting a holistic approach to evidence gathering throughout the audit instead of doing a clause-based audit. Wherever possible, put the findings into perspective, focus on risk and common sense. That's what top management most likely will apply to or respond to. Whenever possible, relate findings to the effect on the organization's ability to provide on-time, on-quality product. And obviously make sure you're always looking at performance against key performance indicators. The main objective of adding value via the audit process is to provide confidence that the output, on-time, on-quality performance of the certified organization will be met. Again, that's the ultimate goal of the automotive industry. I would like to acknowledge that some of today's slide content was provided by the AIAG, the IAOB, and the ANAB. Thank you. And I'll now open the floor up for any questions. We have just over 15 minutes remaining, and I'll gladly field any questions on today's presentation or anything else related to the IATF transition or standard. Again, type your questions into the chat feature or question feature, as all participants have been muted to ensure sound quality. And again, this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording and slides will be available from our website, www.pjr.com. No questions yet, but I'll gladly wait a few more minutes. A question, is the slide presentation available from the PJ website? Yes, www.pjr.com. The slides will be available for download in about 24 hours, Stephen. Okay, getting some questions now. A comment that the emphasis I made on how not writing a nonconformity can sometimes hurt the business. I couldn't agree more, Jesse. One of the things that I preach to all of our certification body auditors, not writing a nonconformity where one exists is absolutely inexcusable. And I believe it's the key to client satisfaction. And the reason is that if you have an auditor who isn't writing findings and just allowing an organization to implement quick fixes for the verbal comments that they make, and those things don't get formally documented, the organization never does disciplined problem solving. The root cause is never identified and eliminated, and these problems ultimately recur. You get a new auditor coming in, and then suddenly there's multiple nonconformities, and the management rep or equivalent is looking at top management having to explain why suddenly there's such disparaging audit results from one third-party auditor to another. Okay, getting a question from an auditor about something I don't believe I've covered. What evidence is required in order to evaluate 6.1? So let me get to 6.1 and we'll talk about what that is. And to be clear, I'm not sure if you mean 6.1 in 9001-2015, because that's where I'm only seeing the 6.1. So Miguel, if you'd clarify, that would be great. But I'm going to look at 6.1 in 9001-2015. And by the way, we have some great webinars on ISO 9001-2015 given by my colleague Joe Krolikowski, and those are available for download. Okay, I'm going to assume that the question relates to 6.1 in ISO 9001-2015. 6.1 is entitled Actions to Address Risks and Opportunities. So it says, when planning the QMS, the organization shall consider the issues referred to in 4.1 and the requirements referred to in 4.2. So 4.1 is the context of the organization. So the internal and external issues shaping the organization, influencing the organization. And 4.2 are the needs and expectations of interested parties. So with these in the back of your mind, you need to be identifying the risks and opportunities that impact your organization relative to all of your processes, start to finish, not just the manufacturing processes. So we're going to be looking at some type of risk analysis, which could be a FEMA, which is going to address many parts of your processes. It could be a capability analysis or feasibility analysis. Again, difficult to answer your question. I'm not sure what clause you're focusing on. If you can clarify, that would be great. Okay, question about root cause. If the standard change, and I'm assuming you mean going from TS to ITF, cause you to make changes, can this be called out as a root cause? I think what you're getting at, Randy, is in this transition audit, which may be the first time you're implementing some of these new requirements, maybe you misunderstood a requirement or how to apply it or what its intent was. Can that be the root cause of the finding? Yeah, I would have some flexibility with that on the transition audit where these requirements are new to you. 2 or 3 years down the road, that wouldn't fly. But yes, on this first audit, I think that that's an acceptable root cause. If, however, that's your root cause, the only acceptable corrective action is getting education or understanding in that requirement. Please let me know if that was not your question. And as we wait for more questions, I can't talk to the point of 723 enough, internal auditor competency. Failure to have a competent internal audit team will invalidate your internal audit and result in a major finding, potentially a suspension, and will invalidate part of your management review, because remember, one of the management review inputs is discussion of the internal audit. Well, if the internal audit is invalid, you're going to have to repeat that management review, or at least part of it. Make sure your internal auditors are competent. You have a process for internal auditor competence, and you can demonstrate that they're all competent. Training certificates in a folder are not alone sufficient and may not even be necessary. Wait just a couple more minutes, folks. Okay, it appears that there's no other questions coming in. We'll conclude today's webinar. Again, I thank you for participating. I know your time is valuable, and I hope you found this webinar helpful as you proceed on the transition journey. Again, copies of the slides and a copy of this recording will be available from our website, www.pjr.com, in about 24 hours. In addition, you can take a look at our website for information and instructions on how to download previously recorded webinars and information on new and upcoming webinars. Thank you very much.